Jesse, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Really appreciate it. As you know, we are striving to become a top source of insight, inspiration, information, best practices, and so on for product marketers, amongst other go to market professionals. But today, we really wanted to focus on you as a product marketing expert. Why don't you take just a quick second to give us a little bit of your career background? You have held product marketing leadership roles at some of the most innovative companies in the world.
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. So my career actually started kind of in an interesting way. I never really meant to get into tech. My family is in the construction industry by trade, and so I went to school for that, and I ended up helping some friends found a company called You Caring. It was one of the first crowdfunding sites out there. We did it for free. Really, we didn't plan on making any money off of it, but then we allowed for people to do like a $10 or $15, kind of like a support us donation on top of what they were doing. And sure enough, it was wildly popular, and we ended up growing that to around a million in MRR, and then it ended up getting acquired. And from there, I moved into CodeMD, which was a startup, and that's really where my product marketing background started. So CodeMD was one of the first cloud developer environments. It was wildly technical. The founder was really great at writing code and really bad at messaging and positioning it. And so I had to figure it out. How do you take something that's so technical that even developers weren't really understanding what we were launching, and make it understandable. And so I did that. That ended up being acquired by Red Hat, where I worked. I went with them to Red Hat for about 2 years. And then from there, I ended up doing a stint at AWS for about another 2 years. And at AWS, I was really kind of an internal product marketing consultant. So I bounced around from 3 or 4 different projects while I was there, all just focusing on repositioning different categories. So I helped with things like GitOps, event-driven architectures, uh, did some stuff with the serverless and Kubernetes team, and then worked on repositioning them in the DevOps category. From there, I went to Docker. I helped scale Docker from about 50 million to 150 million ARR. And then from there, I've gone on to work on other things. So right now, my focus is on Stori, which is a product marketing and positioning consultancy. And then on the side, I also help uh, with an open source project as well that I'm putting quite a bit of effort into.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into messaging and positioning. I know you're an expert at that. Why do most organizations struggle with this? It's really a pretty powerful component to the business, but yet so many of us struggle with that. At a high level, what comes to mind when you think about these challenges?
Yeah. So I think most of the time people have a pretty good understanding that they need to have product messaging and positioning. And so unlike a lot of things, like you'll often talk with founding teams and they're like, "Oh, I just don't see the value of digital marketing," for example. Everyone pretty much agrees that they need to be able to talk about their product. What we find most of the time is that people just don't have the frameworks to really go about that. Messaging and positioning is a massive thing, super broad. And so, how do you break that into kind of bite-sized pieces and just systematically work your way all the way through? And so, at Story, what we've done is if we've come up with a framework that allows you to really look at it from kind of a macro all the way down to a micro level. And so we start, how do you position towards the industry? And that's very strategic. It's not very technical. And then we go to the category. How do you position competitively? And that's like looking across the landscape of everyone that's there. What's your vision for that category? How do you fit into it? What are your benefits? Why do people buy you? And then we go down to the product level, and that's really for users. Like, what is that feature? How do we talk about that one feature that you have that's really driving value?
Yeah. How do you know when you've launched the right positioning or messaging? And I know that this, within at least an early stage startup context, can somewhat vary, right, based on where you're at. Because I know, like, just given my experience launching startups over the years, the way that we go to market might be, although we might have like a the same consistent vision, right, at a high level, like that macro vision that you pitch investors, right? But what we go to market, especially early on, and I know there's some variables like, oh, is it a new category, an existing category, these sort of things might be a little different, right? It might be a little more focused, right? So how do you know that, like, you are at every stage really deploying the right messaging and positioning?
Mhm. Yeah, it's difficult to know. You really have to have a pretty good grasp on how your messaging is hitting the market and what the impact of that messaging is. So let's say something like your industry level messaging. You know, how are investors? How are they responding to that messaging? That's probably your best way of kind of gauging that. The other thing you could do is you could look at how analysts are understanding your market. Are they positioning you in the right place when you talk to Gartner or Forrester? Um, on the category level, really, you have to look at your sales, right? So, are people coming in? Are they converting on your website? Do they understand what you're doing? One of the best things to do is talk to your customers and ask them who are they evaluating you against. Because if you're um, I don't know, a CRM, and you're like, oh, we want to take on Salesforce, and they're like, well, we were really, we were comparing you to something like Marketo. You're like, well, that's not what we were trying to be. Although there is quite a bit of overlap, right? Both of them store contacts, and you can track and kind of interact with contacts that way. That's not where we want to be positioned. So that's a great way to do it. And then also looking at your funnel. So if you have someone coming in the top of funnel and then you have a lot of dropout mid to late funnel, it's
Mm.
probably because they came in for one reason, and then which would be your messaging on the website. And then when they started talking to a human, that messaging didn't line up, or maybe there were two different messages that were being said. Maybe the values didn't line up, the benefits that were being sold. It could be a number of different things, but that's a good indicator as well.
Interesting. I've been part of many startups where we've done a lot of aggressive outbound, let's call it customer development, or there's a lot of different ways to categorize that early motion, where we've told the story and it seems to resonate, right? But then the usage is not there, right? Or the conversion to paid, let's say it's a PLG motion and these sort of things. So on one side, you're sitting there doing what good researchers do, good founders, product marketers, et cetera, do, where we're out there talking to prospects and the market, and are finding, in some cases, right, finding that it's really resonating, there's an opportunity there, but then we don't see the follow-up there, right? And maybe we don't see the inbound there, even when we believe, and notice I say we believe, that the messaging that is on the marketing channel, let's just say the website, and then the story that we're saying verbally or qualitatively is matching. So in those situations, any advice that you would give folks who are struggling with that, around saying, hey, no, this is what you got to do, or this is maybe something that you're doing that is perhaps putting you in that position?
Mhm. Yeah, I think oftentimes when you look at outbound, there's multiple ways of doing outbound, right? So the most popular way of doing outbound, you have a bunch of SDRs, they're hammering the phone, they have a message to put out there. If that's not turning around and turning into some sort of a business impact, I think that the first thing that you're going to be questioning is like, what are those scripts that they're saying, right? What are they really talking about? Oftentimes, what I'll find is that you end up feature selling. So a lot of times, especially with younger SDRs or BDs, they'll go out and they'll start feature selling against someone else. They'll do a bit of diligence. They'll figure out who you're using, and instead of really understanding the pain points, really understanding the challenges that you have, they'll just start saying, "Oh, well, the company that you're currently using has feature set X, Y, and Z. Well, we have X, Y, and Z, plus we also have A, B, and C." That's great. but features don't really solve a pain point, right? You want to really get to what's the pain, what's the challenge the customer is facing, and what would it be to make them either migrate or to take additional budget and put it towards that thing. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about, even from the marketing side. When you either you're bringing a product in and you're replacing something else, or you're asking someone to allocate limited budget to your tool, and you have to help them to understand why that budget is best spent on your tool, or why migrating from something, there's always some sort of migration cost, whether they like the tool or not. There's going to be something there. It's going to be a little bit painful. Why it's worth undertaking that. And the only way you can do that is really talking to those challenges, really talking to those pains, and talking about how you solve those pains for them, painting that better world picture.
Awesome. In terms of tracking the performance of those things you're talking about, right? That story, painting the picture, and these sort of things. I know that we could listen to call recordings and things like that, but any sort of high level, like if I have to write down a couple of these ways of tracking performance across both qualitative and quantitative, let's say data sources, right? Again, whether it be like a call recording or some other more quantitative, although call recordings these days can be transcribed and very
Yeah.
quantitative, right? So I should say that. Uh, but any sort of like high level tips that you would give product marketers out there to be able to track this performance of these things that we work so hard on measuring?
Uh-huh. Um, so I think so. Let's stick with the example of the call recordings. I think a great one is just to ask, how would you describe the product that you're looking for, or how, even if you talk to your customers, you can say, hey, how would you describe our product, and just hear what they say, because oftentimes, you might be selling something, and the customer might be using you for something else, or wanting to use you for something else, and that's really key to hone in on. So if you do have transcripts, that's a great way to do it. I'll say transcripts can be pretty rough, even with all the advancements in AI. My partner sent me a transcript today that I'm like, oh, this is horrible. I have no idea what they talked
Totally.
about. So take it with a grain of salt. One of the things that I like to do is just test messages organically. So I'll put them out over Twitter, or Reddit. If you really want to go through the fire, throw something on Reddit and see what happens. It's a great way to understand. Are people picking up on what you're saying? Are they understanding it? Do they not understand it? So like little organic testing ways like that is great. Obviously, you have some of the paid testing platforms that have come around, like Winter, that you
Yep.
can put your message on, and you can get some good feedback from that as well. And then there's the classic A/B test your website. I think that that was really big a few years ago, and it's kind of died out a little bit. I don't think there's as much emphasis on it, but it's still really, really powerful way to just see, like, are people understanding it? Are they converting? Are they hitting the contact sales button? And that stuff still does get impacted. We had a client just recently that changed their messaging on the website, and they saw the contact sales increase by 50%, or basically
Wow.
overnight. So that's a great way to test also. And let's say it dropped in the other direction. Let's say it went down by 50%. You can roll that change back, and it's really kind of a no harm, no foul type of a situation.
Awesome. What about messaging and positioning as it relates to your stage? Let's say, what do you think that it should look like pre-product market fit, especially when things are changing and evolving so quickly, versus, let's say, a growth or scale up stage?
Yeah. So when you're a new company, you just have to test everything. Um, don't get married to something that works. I would have 4, 5, 6 different messages going out. The way that I like to look at it is I like to test something that's more emotional. I like to test something that's more quantifiable, and then I like to test something that's a comparison, right? So we're the X of Y. And see what that runs. I almost always have 3 of those messages running in market, just seeing how can I optimize them? Because they appeal to different audiences. But when you're early on, you have to just constantly be testing. The later on you get, when I was at AWS, we would spend a whole year just kind of perfecting a message. This is no, like, it's not even in market, right? We're just working on it internally, and then we would launch that. And to some degree, all your eggs are in one basket. You're like, cross your fingers and hope it works because you spent a year working on that. Um, but there's different things. AWS, they're big. They've got an audience, and I think that that's really key. When you don't have an audience, you have to really, really have good messaging. When you have an audience, people will take the time, especially when you're
Mm.
trusted and you have a brand. They'll take a time to kind of read through that messaging to understand what you're actually wanting to do because they care, right? Maybe they're a customer, or maybe they're just fans of your brand. But either way, you don't have that. You don't have that grace when you're a startup.
Yeah, certainly. I've spent the majority of my career at startups, whether it was bringing stuff to market as a co-founder or early employee, and so I I definitely get it.
Yeah.
Quick question about kind of the cadence of iterating. How do you know that you've given a particular message? You mentioned having, let's say, a tagline or some sort of messaging and positioning that speaks to more of an emotional kind of thing.
Mhm.
You had mentioned three, right? Also, like comparisons.
Yeah.
Also, some other iteration on that. W- Like, how do you know it's enough time, right? Like something that is like, y- let's say, verifiable based on the number of data points or some other variable, right?
Mhm. Yeah, so sometimes it depends on which channels you're using. So like if we go back to something like X, you can pretty quickly spin up an X campaign around three different messages, target them at the exact same audience, and then see which one drives the best results. And you can see that in 4 or 5 days. You can tell, okay, this one, outperformed significantly. Um, I think that for something like a website messaging or like a major campaign that you're launching, you're going to want to probably give it a few months. And a lot of that depends on the type of product, how much education you have to do. If you're launching something that's really, really innovative, there's going to be a little bit of an education angle that's going to take place there. And so your message needs to be in market longer before you actually start to see results. There are some early indicators that you can look at, though. One of the ones that I always like to look at are just what's the branded organic search that's happening around my product, because that's going to tell me, okay, are people remembering the product name and are they then searching it, right? And obviously they're going to find you through that. So that's a big one to look at, especially early on. And things like a podcast, right? It's very hard to link who listened to your podcast, where you might be testing out some new messaging, to who landed on my website and hit the contact us form. I think organic search is probably one of the best ways to do that, because if you think about how people hit a website, usually they discover you online. If they discover you online, there's a link, right? So they're going to be a direct, or they're going to have some sort of referral campaign. Um, but something like a podcast, they're looking for you, they know your name, they heard of you, and they're typing it in to find you. So I would look at that to know whether or not your messaging is resonating. Um, yeah, I'd say that's probably one of the best ones.
Thanks for sharing. In terms of story, because I know y'all really focus on helping organizations develop messaging and positioning strategies, particularly tech companies, right?
Yeah,
What does that type of engagement look like typically, and what type of organizations could really benefit from working with Story?
yeah. So usually, our engagements start with companies that are earlier stage. So Series A, they just got funding and they're looking to scale, but they don't have the headcount and they need to start to deploy their capital pretty quickly. usually it's a lot easier to hire a salesperson than it is to hire someone in product marketing or even a product marketing leader. And so they'll come to us and they'll just say, "Hey, we don't have anyone in PMM. We're trying to hire a CMO. They don't have enough time, but our sales team, is ready to go. And we've got 2 people and we've got 3 starting. We need a first call deck. We need some messaging." And so we'll do a really quick project with them. Usually our projects last 30 business days, so 2.5 months. And you can go from no messaging to some pretty solid messaging, and then we turn that into a first call deck or something. So that's usually what it looks like. Um, yeah, most of the time that'll lead into additional work, but you know, we're fine if it's, "Hey, here's your messaging, here's your first call deck, go get to work."
Excellent. Jesse, thank you so much for being on the show today. For the folks out there, if you're a go-to-market professional or a founder or CEO at an early stage company and need help with things like first call decks, definitely reach out to Jesse. I know he's doing an awesome job. I know I've known David, your partner, for many years. So shout out to David and the early Vorsight folks. That was a really fun group. If folks wanted to get in contact with you or learn more about Stori, what are the best URLs or handles to reach you?
Yeah, you can shoot me an email, Jesse, Jesse, at GoStories, GOSTORI.com. Or you can reach out to David. He's just David at GoStory.com as well. Our URL is GoStory.com. So just remember it's an I and not a Y.
Cool. Well,
Yeah,
thanks again, Jesse. Really appreciate it, and have a great day.
of course.